All right, hey everybody. Welcome to our session. I'm Alex Tompkins. I'm in product management for Citrix Cloud. And to my left, I have Craig Hinchcliffe. He's product management for Workspace platform. So today we're going to be talking through some simple and quick steps on how to get from StoreFront to Workspace. But before we get into it, wanted to go over some of the logistics. So please, I wanted to get this out of the way first. Rate our session at the end of it if you liked it, hopefully. Please don't forget. And then second, to make this a little bit more interactive of a session, we're going to be using the polling feature that's actually in the Citrix Events app. So if you can go ahead and open the app for our session specifically, there's actually a polls tab on the right that you can see. So we got 5 questions throughout the session. All the questions are open now, but try to stick with us because it kind of goes along with the presentation, and we want to make sure that we're asking at the right time, given the background we're going to lay out. So we're actually going to start with the first question here, just to make sure everybody can use the app and we can see the live results come in. So the first question is, since his photo was taken, how much weight has he lost?
Wait. This way?
He's actually wearing the same jacket, so you guys should be dialed in. So here are the options. This is actually going to be the only question where there's a right or wrong answer here. The rest are mostly just to kind of gauge where you guys are at in your cloud journey. So those are in pounds. All right. So hopefully we'll see some results come in here as you guys answer. Oh, it is. There it is.
This is fancy.
It's not 0. There's the one hint for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for whoever did that one.
All right.
We done?
I was hoping it'd be like a nice chart graph here. We didn't test this out before. They didn't really give us too much time. So, all right. So it looks like the majority is saying C, which is 18. Correct answer is 27.
Thank you for. Oh, stop it! I thank you for whoever took that photo last year, because you did encourage me to lose weight. So whoever you are, if you're here today, thank you.
I think it's that guy right there.
There's a guy in the camera.
All right.
How much have you gained this week?
About 28 pounds.
All right. Cool. I'm glad it worked. So go ahead, Craig.
Oh, it's my turn.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to kind of, if you've been living in a cave for the last year and you're not aware of what Citrix Workspace is and the direction of where we're going, last year we announced Citrix Workspace, generally available with a 90-day promise, and it was really something that our marketing had always been ahead of us from a product perspective or a solution in having a unified place to access all your Citrix stuff, across mobile devices, web browsers, and the newly announced Workspace app. And we've kind of talk about the bringing all of these components in from a content collaboration, trying to remember the new brand names as I do this, endpoint management, and bringing those in to truly have the first time where we've had a story where we can bring all these into one place. But of course, as you start to bring in things like content and collaboration, you have the ability to do cross-flow or cross-workflows like open with content and collaboration with the virtual apps and desktop service. And then, as you kind of saw at the keynote, we're going from Workspace not just being about an icon launcher, but how do you bring the integrations of these, again, going back to the reference example of Citrix files or content collaboration with virtual apps and desktops as an example of that. So it's just kind of like I say, if you have been living in a cave, or you didn't know this, it's just a kind of a quick set the scene. And then, any of you attend Synergy last year? And you saw Carissa spill coffee over the laptop. And we had the joy of the promise of the 90-day promise and ensuring that we delivered what PJ had announced at Synergy. So, I think it was early August where we delivered this. And that was where we were. Now, of course, there's much more to Workspace. And on the left, with the blue circles, that was the primary focus of what we used to call front door. now known as Citrix Workspace. That was how do you bring in all Citrix applications into one place, enabling content and collaboration. But then as you go into the green circles, how does it become more than just a place to launch applications? So, I'm sure a lot of you don't just use Citrix technologies, and that's, a reality. So how do you bring in things like Okta as SaaS apps, as well as an IDP, or, even VMware? I'm sure that a lot of you are using VMware Horizon in conjunction with Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops. It's a common thing we see, especially in mergers and acquisitions. And then the last one, which you would have seen at the keynote yesterday, is how do we bring this into an intelligent workspace? Now, just to be very clear, and you'll hear Alex and I say this throughout the session, intelligent workspace is not another thing that you have to deploy. It's additive to Citrix Workspace. Okay, so as you add the capabilities, you give that to specific users. And I've worked in Citrix a very long time. I've been here 12 years in January, and I was in sales for 8.5 of those. And we always talk about these shiny things, but we never really help you on that journey of how do I get from where I am to where I need to get to. And for all of you, it may be various different things. Maybe you don't want the intelligent workspace, but maybe you do want to remove on-premises Xanapp and Zen Desktop or VAD, move that to the cloud. Maybe you do want to use intelligent workspace, and that journey looks different for all of you. But you start off here, and it's like, well, how do I get to here? Now, I showed this to my stepson the other day, and he was like, well, it's easy. Just go left, right, left, right, left, right, left. Well, sometimes you can't always see, over the horizon. So before we kind of go into any more detail, we have another question for you, one a little bit more serious than the last one. So again, if you can pull out your devices and just give the answer that best fits this question. All right.
You want to go over the options?
So yeah, what's that?
I was going to say if you want to read off the options.
You want me to read out the options?
Oh, wow.
So I'm guessing that a lot of it's A, is it? Which isn't a surprise, and kind of goes back to the reference point of the green dot at the very beginning of that.
Okay.
Thanks, Alex. So just kind of looking at where you are on your journey, you've already pretty much gave me the answer to this. The majority of you are kind of the blue dot. Now, I'm just going to give you some insights. And just to be very clear, this windy road does not necessarily need to be your journey. It's just, these are kind of areas where we've seen our customers over the last year or so where they actually are inside this. So a typical one we see was using traditional storefronts on-prem and leveraging something like virtual apps and desktops. So really moving the infrastructure as a service into the cloud, still leveraging your virtual apps and desktops or your VDA on premises. And that was really the kind of your first dipping the toe in the cloud as such. And then we did things like making NetScaler gateway service available with storefront. So again, that was another flexible option. As I've always said in Citrix throughout my time, it's all about choice, and that's what we give you in this flexible model of moving to Citrix Cloud and Workspace. Other ones we see are kind of like when they start to now move to the Workspace. And that's when you're starting to use the user experience that's now in the cloud, but still leverage virtual apps and desktops, which may be your secondary piece of infrastructure in the cloud. Now, again, it doesn't have to be this, and we'll touch on the next one. And that's where, and my good friend Alex did a great job on this, site aggregation inside Workspace. And that's where you can start to aggregate your on-premises Xanapp 6.5 or your existing virtual apps and desktops technology that you have on-premises and bring that directly into the Workspace. And Alex will take you through that in more detail later on. And again, you can start to leverage things. We've seen a lot of customers see this as I'm not sure what I'm going to use the cloud for. Is it a disaster recovery kind of scenario, or am I truly embraced in the cloud and I want to move away from on-premises to the cloud? And then you've got the kind of the next one, which is where we're starting to see people use things like content and collaboration and virtual apps and desktops. Maybe they're using site aggregation as well, and they start to become a multiple service customer of Workspace. And then, of course, the ultimate goal is to have that place where you go to do your work rather than a place you go to launch apps and then, lose all that productivity that was kind of mentioned in the keynote. But of course, we're not saying that it has to be that windy road. As long as you're on the Workspace track, so you're at that red dot, which is when you were first starting to use Workspace, then you can switch directly to enabling the intelligent Workspace. And like I say, I've been involved in Workspace from the day it was born, and all the time before that, of making the baby as well, so to speak. And we learned some lessons as we delivered this, and we'll cover these off. And one of them was how we gave the new user experience to the end users. It was literally a canary that we gradually did for all of our customers, and we did a lot of product messaging, so you were getting emails and notifications in Citrix Cloud. But for your end users, there was not an education. So with the addition of Intelligent Workspace, which you'll notice does visually look different, David mentioned that the apps are now on the right, the files are on the right. So we're going to manage the access of this. So you'll be able to set what groups of users have access to this, and if they're not in that group, they will continue to see the workspace that you know today. So it allows you to kind of have that additional flexibility, and with inside that, we're going to use some technology that allows you to navigate the users through their new experience. Here are my files, here are my apps, here are my desktops, and here's my new notification page with my work streams for things like Workday and Concur. So, another question. Again, should we switch? Yeah. So where do you see yourselves in the next 12 months with Citrix? Let me get a graph on that one.
I don't know why we got a graph for that one, but
there is a reason we're asking all these questions. It's because we can then take this data and we can look at how we need to address our roadmaps to tie into this and maybe have better stories about how we take you from the next steps.
Cool.
All right.
All right. So let's start with, if you are, with the first question, or the second question we asked, I'm sorry, which is, where are you guys all today, right? And I think the grand majority of the room, over 100 of you actually said on-prem storefront, on-prem licenses at this point. So the first question when we were thinking about how do we take these steps to start teasing out Workspace, the first question is usually, well, how do I get it, right? And we're not talking about the Workspace bundles at this point, which is your marketing SKUs that you buy or you purchase through your partner. We're actually talking about the experience itself, what your end users would be logging into in this unified single pane of glass that we've been talking about. So there's really two main categories. The first is probably the easiest answer, right? Which is any of those bundles that we're talking about, that we've been talking about for probably over a year now, the different Workspace bundles, all these come with the ability to use the service. The other option is, we have all of our standalone services that can be purchased as well as trialed. So even if you trial a standalone offering like content collaboration or secure browser, or virtual apps and desktop service, you actually get the ability to use Workspace during that trial period as well. So there's really two major options there. One, much more of a longer commitment, and then the other one, which is shorter term. But either of these options give you access within Citrix Cloud to go to Workspace configuration. And we got a picture of what that actually looks like to validate that you have access to Workspace. Another couple key questions besides how do I get it is a lot of the times is, well, what's the difference, right? We've been talking about storefront, then Workspace, and now intelligent Workspace. So what you guys probably all know best here, right, is what we have on the screen, the Citrix StoreFront, on-prem storefront. The key elements are it is customer managed, and it is really primarily focused around that VADS use case. So XenApp, and XenDesktop on-prem, and you can even aggregate those cloud services of VADS within storefront. And as the evolution here to Workspace, and this was really what we highlighted last Synergy, is now we're thinking of it as it's not so much customer managed anymore, but it's Citrix managed. It falls now into the portfolio of things that Citrix manages for you. as a cloud service, and it's really the aggregation of all of Citrix services, right? So we're not just talking about the VADS use case anymore. We're now talking about the SaaS apps use case, the content collaboration use case, the endpoint management. So it's really that accumulation of Citrix services together, right? And then now taking it one step further is now intelligent workspace. And as Craig mentioned, we're going to reiterate this, definitely one thing to take with you when you leave today is that it's additive in nature, right? You can stay on workspace and then add the intelligent pieces when you're ready and your organization's ready for it. You're not introducing a whole new platform. There's not a whole bunch of new configuration that's needed. It's really just one more step in the journey and on that windy road that Craig kind of highlighted. So some of the key elements we just wanted to compare out, right? So if your end users start to get used to that workspace experience, the one that is available today, your tabs still stay. They're left on the left-hand side. You have your applications that are still prevalent, and even your content, right? So there's a mapping there between the old and the new, and again, additive in nature. So it's not something that you kind of have to redo a whole like rollout process for with the intelligent workspace. So question 4. There's only 2 more. So if you guys are getting tired of going to your phones already, how do you see the cloud working for you? You got to switch the. It's a nice split.
Still.
All right, pretty even split there. Okay, let's.
So as I said, over the last year, feeling some of the pains that some of our customers have gone through as they've moved to Workspace. So I wanted to kind of just highlight some things that you really need to think about as you go on this journey. Even if you're not ready for cloud, there are still things that you need to be thinking about with on-premises as well. I don't want to scare anybody by this slide, but how many of you knew that Receiver, as in the current release, goes end of life in December of this year? Zero. How many of you are on Receiver? Uh-oh. So that's just to be very clear, that's the CR, not the LTSR. And then there is a Receiver LTSR, which goes end of life August 2020. How many of you knew that? A few more hands, that's good. So this is just one thing. Like I say, even if you don't move to Workspace and you continue to use StoreFront, you need to start thinking about using Workspace app because of the fact that you're going to be using an end-of-life client. So that's one thing. The second thing is that let's remove the marketing from this as we say this. Workspace app and and Receiver do the very same things. Now, Workspace app does some additional stuff and has had some enhancements, but you should be able to do everything that you did with Workspace app that you did do with Receiver. Okay. So that's just one thing I really want to highlight. So just start thinking about that, depending on where you're going to go with your journey, even if you stay on-prem. And second one, how many of you use Fin terminals? How many Workspace apps are there for Fin terminals? Thank you, Joe. Joe's, that was a 0 for anybody that didn't see. So, and again, this is something we've learned. If you look at the kind of what Workspace is about, it's about a modern UI that doesn't just deliver virtual apps and desktops. It delivers content and collaboration. It delivers SaaS. It's fairly unlikely that if I want to access Workday, I launch a virtual desktop and then go inside that desktop to launch an application. Ideally, I just want to go straight to that. And we felt this with some of the Fin terminals. I'm not saying Fin terminals are bad. This is to educate you that if you have lots of Fin terminals and you want to move to the Workspace, you need to think about what are you going to do about that. We also had some, and this was more, when you come to BYO, we had some customers who had MacBooks that they hadn't updated for 3 years, and then the Workspace would not load on those devices. So, it is a modern experience. I kind of refer to this as, to steal a phrase from Mark Templeton. He used to talk about security and experience as these 2 negative magnets that you push together, and obviously they bounce off each other. that's kind of what it's like with the traditional Citrix world and cloud. You've got people that I've been doing Citrix stuff for 20 years. I got very excited when I had a DOS 622 floppy disk that I booted up and had an ICA client that then launched Windows applications. Those things aren't going to give you what you need in the cloud because you're using modern, things that are no longer controlled by you, they're controlled by the cloud. For example, we've disabled TLS 1.0 and 1.1 in the cloud now, so again, Workspace app is the only one that supports TLS 1.2. Well, there's some older receivers that do that as well, but just so, like I say, just not trying to scare you, but I think it's always nice to know these things before you make that move and then find out afterwards. And then, another essential thing, we speak to lots of customers. We hear customers that want to go down the Azure AD routes. They're using Ping, they're using Okta, just using Active Directory, and maybe they want to use our own OTP technologies rather than invest in something because this is the only way into anything. And so as part of that, and how many of you are using Azure AD? So it's a fair few, right? And that's typically driven by things like Office 365 and your investments in Microsoft. And we're doing things, and we'll talk about this a bit more, but cloud-enabled FAS to give you single sign-on or federated sign-on between Active Directory or Azure AD and Active Directory. So again, it's an important thing to think about. One of the nice things about Workspace app is that when we move to this, we try and take the intelligence out of the client. If any of you have ever looked at the receiver matrix and had that challenges when you're talking to systems engineers and salespeople, you do have a challenge of what operating system to actually use because some of the receivers did something and some of them didn't. So we're trying to kind of remove that and make the platform be the intelligence piece. And one of the things we did, we put a web view in the Workspace app, which now means that we can use Okta or AAD, and guess what? It works across all the devices. So that's another benefit of using Workspace app. So with that, our final question. So what is your identity strategy in regards to ITP selection or use? What have we got there? So it's interesting to see it's a balance between NetScaler and Azure AD. Which is great because Workspace supports both of those. So that's good to know.
All right. All right. So next up, where to start? That's usually the next question after how do I get it? We have 6 steps here. Steps were pretty straightforward. It doesn't mean it has to be your exact path, as Craig highlighted. But if you wanted to revert back to these slides and actually follow these steps, you could. So definitely got a lot of feedback from customers in previous sessions on, give me one path, right? I know there's multiple paths, but maybe just recommend one. So this is one of the ones we recommended, and at the end, we'll kind of show you that there's some deviation to this if you'd like. So the first is, get access to Workspace, right? That's item number 1, as we highlighted how to do that. Buying the Workspace bundles, trialing one of our services, or buying one of the standalone services. The second and third, I'll blow these out, are actually just more specific to Citrix Cloud as a whole. So they're not specific just to Workspace. So if you intend to trial any of our cloud services, you're going to have to do these anyway. So these are not steps that are particular to just getting onto Workspace. So you'll want to create your resource location, install connectors, and I have a slide for each of these, so we'll just deep dive really briefly on each. And then we're going to complete the site aggregation workflow. I'll talk about that in more detail. You're going to select what auth method you'd like. As Craig highlighted, there's various options, so you want to select how your end users authenticate against Workspace, and then you log in, right? And then you're off and running. So let me go into each one of these a little bit. So the first one, as I mentioned, you're purchasing or trialing a standalone service. Now, how you can validate once you log into Citrix Cloud is that what we call the hamburger menu, the real technical product management term for the menu on the left-hand side of Citrix Cloud. You'll see once you're enabled a new option called Workspace Configuration. So once you have that option show up on your hamburger menu, that means that you have access to Workspace. You'll actually have a unique URL that's created for your organization. So the second piece, creating a resource location. So as mentioned, this is Citrix cloud-wide, right? It's not just Workspace. So you're essentially a resource location. There's a ton of documentation on this step and the next one online. But the 30-second spiel here, your resource location is the place where all the resources you need to kind of power your cloud services. So you're going to put your VDAs there. You'll have your Active Directory there. And these can be on a private cloud, public cloud, or on-prem data center. You choose. And how many you choose to create, you need to at least have one, is your call as well. So if you want to have it closer to your users, closer to your data center, that's your call as you kind of, your call to make it particular and unique to your organization. So how Citrix Cloud communicates with your resource locations is essentially the next step. You're going to be installing cloud connectors. And we recommend 2 cloud connectors per resource location. It's a pretty straightforward process. Click through, you actually get the confirmation that you're connected and the connectors are communicating with your resource location. So those are the kind of the main 2 Citrix Cloud steps. Even if you wanted to try the virtual apps and desktop service, this is something that you would need to do outside of Workspace configuration. All right. So the fourth step now is the site aggregation workflow. So I'm going to deep dive a little bit on this feature itself to make sure it's super clear on what it is and why we're talking about and spending probably a couple minutes on it. So the first thing to note is where it is and what is it, right? So when you get into that Workspace menu item that I talked about, there is a 5th tab there that's highlighted in blue, and that's called Sites. So that's this site aggregation feature that we're talking about. So it is a very simple 4-step workflow. And what it ultimately does is brings your on-prem apps and desktops that are being hosted in your on-prem storefront today, and it brings it to Workspace. So sounds like a bit of an infomercial heel, but when you do this, it's risk-free. So what we mean by that is you're not actually making changes to your on-prem storefront. So this is a process that's completely parallel to your production workloads. So you can do this tangentially with just your Workspace and maybe have like a subset of users trying out Workspace. So you can do this workflow and you're essentially pointing your cloud connectors. I'm sorry. So I got froze up there for a second. So no changes for on-prem, and you're kind of off and running with Workspace at this point. So your production users are doing their thing on-prem, and they don't really need to know, frankly, that you actually have this Workspace spun up. So a couple of these use cases that we wanted to highlight with SiteAg and why we're talking about it. So the first thing is there's definitely use cases, right, that you can use SiteAg. I think this first one aligns to this audience the most, right? We saw over 100 responses purely on-prem, using on-prem storefront. So we really do think that this is SiteAg is a low-risk approach to trying Workspace. Like I said, you do this workflow, on-prem storefront, no changes, and you can kind of log into Workspace and start using it right off the bat. So you can maybe keep that to your IT group itself or a test set of users. So this is kind of the pure on-prem only. It's a good entry point, right? I think the phrase that Craig always uses is dipping your toes in the water with cloud. It's a starting point, right? There's also for the customers that really do plan on maintaining their hybrid environments. So as you spin up other cloud services, you can have your on-prem apps and desktops right next to your cloud apps and your cloud services. So if you plan on long-term maintaining this hybrid environment, this feature is also good because you can have both of those resources, your cloud and on-prem, in the same workspace, right? And your end users don't need to know, or they probably don't care, that the resources are different, right? They're just accessing that single workspace. And then lastly, for the customers that plan on migrating, you can get customers on to Workspace, and you can start doing an app-by-app approach to migration with moving apps from on-prem to the cloud. So there's different use cases for SiteAg, but we're definitely agreeing across the board that is a great starting point to start with Workspace. So then the last piece is, or the second to last piece is picking your auth method. Once you install your connectors, I think we default to Azure AD. Active Directory. So you have additional options for different authentication options for your end users if you choose not to use Active Directory. Once that's done, you don't have to. That's kind of an optional step if you want to change. You basically then go to the Access tab, and you have a unique URL that's for your organization that's created when you get provision of Workspace. and you log in against it, right? So that's it. So once you log in and against this URL, you should see your on-prem apps and desktops after completing SiteAg in that workspace, right? And then kind of taking it next steps, and just to, hopefully this drives the point home. What we did here is we're kind of showing the workspace that we have in the PM org here is we brought in a traditional on-prem desktop to the left. You can see it in the workspace there that we're highlighting. And once you complete this workflow, right, and you kind of want to start teasing out new cloud services, as we keep mentioning, Workspace is additive, right? So let's say you wanted to then follow through with a purchase or a trial of the virtual apps and desktop service, you can do that. And then those apps will proliferate the workspace. Same thing with content collaboration, right? So once you add content collaboration, the files portion of the workspace blows out, those files will show up, and you can start doing things like Craig mentioned, open in your virtual apps. You can start using the features that are cross-product and cross-service in nature. And then lastly, again, taking it now to another service, the gateway service, you can start bringing in your SaaS apps, single sign-on. So that really, just to reiterate, right, you're starting with your on-prem with no changes. You're bringing it into Workspace. That's your first step. And then you can decide on your next steps and how far along you want to go and in what time you want to go in with these cloud services, right? And it just keeps adding to the experience.
So again, as we kind of already this week talking to customers and like, doesn't do this, doesn't do that, the typical Citrix conversation of gaps. And so we just kind of wanted to give you an insight into the shortcoming. With engineering people in here, so we're going to scare them when we put these things on slides. But it's just to kind of give you some insights into some of the things that we're doing in the short term. And you'd have probably heard some of these already in other sessions. So the first one is, you probably know it as multiple stores. So I'm assuming a majority of you are using StoreFront. You knew this with web interface as well, with sites. It's a little different with Workspace because, as we keep saying, Workspace is multiple services. So we need to make this work across all services. So as an example, and I'm going to use what I know as customer terms. So you have your production where everybody logs in, day out. And then you have the stuff, in England we say tinker, so to play around with. And maybe that tinkering is to enable Azure AD with cloud-enabled FAS. You don't want to turn it on your production because you're going to impact every single user. So the whole idea here with Spaces is you have that flexibility of your production workspace URL versus your test workspace URL with the capabilities that you want to turn on. That could be service-based, it could be branding, it could be share file content and collaboration enabled with virtual apps and desktops with OpenWith, because you want to make sure these things work as they should before you just turn them on and find out you've broken stuff or we've broken stuff. So that's one, so you'll see that coming. Still some decisions to make, and maybe I can ask this question while I'm here. Seeing as a majority of you are virtual apps and desktops, if we did this specifically for identity and virtual apps and desktops, would that cover you as an acceptable use case to start with, or should we do it as a multiple service, workspace focused thing? So just a show of hands, would that be acceptable for? So the first one, as in just works multiple spaces with virtual apps and desktops, can I see a show of hands? Okay. And multiple services? Okay, so majority is on the former. So the next one, this is normally one that everybody asks about. So Amy and Tom got this question about 2,000 times at Summit. And this was around, how do I stop my end users from always going through Gateway when they're internal? So if any of you that don't know this, today what happens is the user goes to Workspace, log in, they click on the icon, sends down the prepare through the connectors which talk to your DDCs, which in turn prepare the VDA. That then sends the user back out through the cloud to the end user, and then the user comes back through the very same path and hits the gateway service and launches that VDA. It's just here. So the idea here is we'll set up these things called locations, not to be confused with resource locations. We'll need to work on the naming. So you still go to the customer.cloud.com. You still send the prepare. We also send the ICA file back to the end user. And then if the user is known as internal, then we connect directly to the VDA. Therefore, meaning your end users don't have to go through a gateway. Okay, that's probably one of the biggest things we get asked for. So you'll see that coming shortly as well. Another one, we have, I don't know if it's an official name externally, we have this thing called Athena, which is our identity platform. And that's how we enable ourselves to talk to various things. We talk to Active Directory, we do Azure AD, although it's not with single sign-on, but we'll touch on that in a moment. We then did AD and OTP, which is now officially out of tech preview. And it will actually become the default auth method, because we should not be enabling you to just have single factor in your workspace. So if you want to turn it off, that's down to you as a customer, but we should be enforcing you to use two-factor. And then we've got some others in here that you can see. So NetScaler AAA, which is actually, I think in tech preview, or it's a managed tech preview currently. This means you can use your on-premises NetScaler using AAA and using the existing Radius and two-factor technologies that you're already using if you're leveraging NetScaler. So again, becomes a nice, easy journey. When we spoke about that, how do I move to the cloud when I want to use the same identity? I still want to use Radius with, I don't know, RSA as an example. Thanks, Joe. And then we have cloud-enabled FAS. So any of you using FAS today? So this is where we can then start to do federated logon to the likes of Okta or Azure AD. So when you're logging on with your AAD credentials, when you're logging on to SaaS apps, that's fine because you're typically using SAML. But when you're logging on to Windows resources, there is no SAML. And so you've got to do some kind of federated login. And that's where we can then leverage cloud-enabled FAS. And again, that's in tech preview. I know Joe did a session yesterday. I don't know if you mentioned that's... Okay, thank you. So anyway, so that's something that's there that you'll be able to use, and is again a managed tech preview that you'll be able to play with very shortly. And Daniel's got a session today, tomorrow.
It's right after this.
Right after this one, in this room.
No.
Okay.
We call it out at the end, so
Of course we do. I know we rehearsed these slides, right? So this is, various pieces, but the one we're really talking about here is how do we, going back to the point earlier in one of the slides with the blue and green circles, a lot of you are probably using things like, if you're using Okta as an IDP, there's probably a fairly high likelihood you're probably using the SaaS apps from the very same provider. So how do we bring those resources in to Workspace and then give you single sign-on directly into Citrix Workspace? Of course, we're also talking about the identity as well, so we'd have to leverage that as an IDP and then get in the single sign-on, which we mentioned earlier on. So that's, again, something that you will see coming shortly. We've put far too many animations in this presentation. There we go. And then lastly, the intelligent workspace. So how many of you were in the keynote demo? Glad to see there's a lot of hands in there. It was a bit of a waste of time if you hadn't have watched that. So of course, and how many of you are kind of interested in this intelligent workspace, these kind of productivity workflows? Is that something that's kind of, yeah? I'm really excited because there are engineering people in the room going to say this. If I'm getting 1 day of productivity back per person, that means I get about 10 features a month extra. That's how I'm translating that. So of course, this will be made available. I know we're doing a tech preview with I think it's about 50 customers, and then you're going to see this GA, at some point this year.
Yeah, so we're closing up here. Just wanted to call out some sessions. There's a couple on Intelligent Workspace that are happening tomorrow. And then the Okta one is actually right after this at 3:30. So we're actually doing a joint presentation with our Okta partner. So be a pretty interesting session if you care about that roadmap, if you're an Okta customer. And then lastly, we put it up here because it was recorded. Yesterday we had a deep dive session. I think it was actually in this room potentially on Citrix Cloud Identity, or what's new in Cloud Identity. So that is going to be recorded and be on the Synergy site. So it might be worth checking out if that's something you want to hear more about the roadmap and what's been done over the last year. All right, and then lastly, we're going to break here for questions, which is great. We have 5 minutes for questions, but we did have, we are doing some research efforts. We're trying to meet essentially customers that are very interested in the workspace and trying to understand how we can better administrate that workspace experience. So if you fall into one of these two categories, you're actually managing, the first category is you are managing multiple cloud services today, not just VADs. And also, if you're already actually using the current workspace, if you are, I'd ask you to please email me. We are doing gift card incentives for research. It basically takes about an hour of your time with you and your fellow coworkers, and then we'll compensate you with a gift card. So please take us. I'll leave that up for just 10 seconds here.
Just feel free to take Alex's email anyway, and just if you ever have any questions, yeah. A couple of hundred people in the room.
All right. All right, that's it, guys. So there's 2 mics on the side of the room. We have about 5 minutes left in this room before we get kicked out. So if anybody wanted to step up and ask some questions, I'd say go for it.
No questions.
If not, thanks for coming.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Okay.